Um, I know your first question is how I got into music and the music business. Yeah.
Right.
So I grew up in upstate New York in Woodstock, which is where I live now. At the time, I was in high school, early 70s. It was a big music scene up here. So you were just enraptured with it. You know, Bob Dylan lived up here and the band and things that were probably before your time, but were big artists of their time, right? And so that had a lot of influence on me. And we were also only 2 hours from New York City, so we could go down to shows if we wanted to. And of course, that was the almost the advent of the music business was in the '60s and '70s. So it was a for a young kid, it was a influential time. Yeah. A lot of my friends played, but I wasn't really a player, but I wanted to be involved and hanging out with them when they played their shows, right? Local shows. So, in a weird way, I was the only guy that had a real job at that time and had a car. And so I became what they would call the pseudo manager. um, so I realized that that's like an actual job, and like that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a rock and roll manager. Took a number of years just doing local things, but I eventually got hooked up and an invitation to go to Los Angeles and started working with a really big manager in the rock and roll business, guy by the name of Shep Gordon. There's a great movie about him, a documentary called Super Mensch, that's directed by Mike Myers. It's about this guy. So if you ever get a chance to watch it, it's really, really good. Um, his client, he had multiple clients, but his client then and still is now was Alice Cooper. So I went out to California and I started working with Alice as kind of like a junior manager guy. Yeah. And at the same time, that was the beginning of my career, working my way up to being a real manager. Okay. And this guy, Shep Gordon, was very gracious. He's a to this day, he's a really wonderful man. He's mostly retired these days. But he also started one of the very first independent film companies in Los Angeles back in the 80s, right? Called Alive Films. And we did a bunch of, there was a bunch of, low budget independent movies. And we had a little company that had a film company on one side of the office and a music company on the other side of the office. And one of the people involved in the film said, "Hey, by the way, the director has one or two songs that he wants to use in his film. Does anybody know how to get the rights to them?" And I looked around I was a young kid, so I would do anything, right? And I looked around the room, nobody raised their hand. So I raised my hand and said, "No, I don't know how to do it, but I will figure it out." And they go, "You got the job." And I became a music supervisor that day. Um, and interesting enough, Shep started a genre company for very specific films, and he became the first guy to do these horror films. And the two clients that he had that he brought in were John Carpenter and Wes Craven. So,
Wow.
and I was kind of like the in-house music guy that started working on the films. And back in those days, soundtracks were pretty big and whatnot. So, um, I kind of got into this working relationship, not so much with John because John Carpenter was a kind of a lone wolf and he did all the music himself and he was very good at it, kind of in an amateur way, but very good, right? Wes, on the other hand, him and his producing partner, a woman named Marianne Maddalena, took an office in our building. And so I had an office, kind of a small little closet right next to their office. And I started working with them, and Wes was completely different than John. Wes was very open to having people work with him. He was one of those type of directors that created a team around him, and um, it usually over the course of my time, I did 10 Wes movies, by the way, just so you know, 10 Wes Craven films, including the first three Screams. Yeah, but the very first one we did was a movie called Shocker. I don't know if you, I'm sure you see it every, it's around. It wasn't the best movie in the world, but it was fun. And I was the guy that was put in charge of putting the soundtrack together because soundtracks were very big back then. And this would be, and it was, the very first soundtrack for a horror film. And
Wow.
we had a bunch of great music. I worked with guys from Motley Crue and Kiss, and it was like a heavy metal soundtrack. Alice was on it, right? And so I became and then I got to work with Wes in the sense that the soundtrack was used as a marketing tool. The music was kind of just shoved in different places, like a car radio, and you hear it and be 10 seconds of a song, right? And then there was an end title song or whatever. But we created this cool soundtrack, and I had to go to Wes and say, Wes, we got these 10 songs that we put the soundtrack together. You got to find a spot in the movie for them, right? So it could be legitimately called the soundtrack, right? And he was very cool because he realized the power of the music as a marketing tool. There's one thing about Wes. He was really, really open and cool about that. Yeah. I'm going to just keep rattling because you're going to hear the whole story then, right? And
Right. Go for it.
it'd be better this way too. So, and then I'll stop and you can ask another question. So, but this is how I got going and with Wes. So we did Shocker, and the soundtrack actually came out really, really well and did really good business, even more so than the movie did at the time. Yeah. And so I just had started this relationship with Wes. And then I went on to do a couple other ones under that deal, like People Under the Stairs, and there was something else I think we did. And then the relationship with Shep, who was a producer on these films, ended, and Wes and Marianne left the offices. And then they started Scream. And in the middle of Scream, they called me up and said, you got to come in here and help us out. We need help with the music. And so that's where I got to that point as a music supervisor and starting my big relationship with Wes that led into my whole existence, not only as a music supervisor, but doing a lot of horror movies over the years as well. And so that was the start of that. And so you can ask another question if you like. I figured I'd get you to that point.
Right, right. So, when it comes to the music, what you're exactly looking for when it comes to a film like this?
Well, again, back in those days, it was twofold. It was to find music that you could sell because there was a soundtrack, and that was an important part of it because there was money generated from that the studios were interested in. They could use it as another marketing tool. That's number one. Number two, though, and I learned this, and Wes was a big teacher with this too. It's like, well, where can we use this movie successfully in the narrative of the film, right? Because you can throw anything in the background for 10 seconds and it doesn't, it has no impact, and then it has nothing else, right? So you then had a lot of choices. You can put anything in it, right? But when you had to then find music that actually help the cinematic experience, that's a whole different story, right? So, it's a lot of it was trial and error. Again, Wes had the same people working with him for a long time, same editors, producers, post production people. We all were like a family, right? And I would spend a lot of my time with the editor, a guy named Patrick Lucier, who's a pretty big horror director himself these days, right? And so Pat was Wes's editor for a long time, and him and I would spend hours in the room with music. Patrick had a good ear for music, and he was also open to the point of trying it in different places in the film so that it would have more of an impact. Okay, that it became part of the experience. A lot of that credit for me to how to learn to do that was through Patrick. Yeah. And then we would sit and trial and error. We would um, put things up against the screen, you know, you're doing all this before a score is put together. By the way, this is what we call temp music, right? Sometimes it stays, sometimes it gets thrown out. It depends, right? And when you're doing temp, you know, you're usually like lots of times you're trying songs and putting it in places as if it was composed score. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
90% of the time it would get thrown out and the score would come because you're dealing with themes and things like that. Well, on Scream, I was a big fan of this guy named Nick Cave, who people know now. But at the time, he was not as well known. Certainly not in the United States. He's Australian, but he was living in England. But I saw him live, and he was just his music was cinematic. You know, I mean, I would, as a concert goer, I would sit there, close my eyes, hear this, and see him, and visualize it in a movie. I can hear it. Yeah. So I actually bought it into the film before that called Vampire in Brooklyn. I don't know if you ever, with Eddie Murphy, right?
I love that movie.
You do. I see it now on TV actually. And it was okay. It was all right. But at the time, when I brought that music, the Nick Cave music in, and I sat with Patrick, it was sort of at the end of the production for that movie, and there really wasn't a space for it. But we both realized that, wow, this is pretty good, and this could work. So that when Scream came along, Pat and I was sitting there one day, and this is very early on in the movie, and I go, do you still have that Nick Cave record I gave you? And he goes, yeah. I go, let's try that. So we literally was like in those days a CD, right? That we would keep around, I guess. This would be after vinyl and after tape, but before you could stream things. Okay, so you know you had to physically come in with something, right? So there was a song on it called "Red Right Hand" that was on the release. Again, I don't even know if the record was out in America, to be honest with you. You know, and it was early on in that, and we heard that, and it had this intro with these like gongs, you know, like these, and then it would be this creepy dum 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 dum, right? And we kind of looked at each other and go, "Wow, this is pretty cool." And then we started playing with it in the film. And again, it was very early on the film. It wasn't a complete cut, but it was. We were able to, and Patrick mainly was able to cut it into the movie so that it kind of became the announcement for the ghost face, right? And it took over this thing it was one of the very first pieces of music we put into the early part of Scream. And it just had this because you don't see the ghost face killer until almost halfway through the movie. People getting killed, but you don't even see the mask, I don't think, until halfway through the movie. So you needed something that would announce that he was around. And the song took on that announcement. So normally in the film business, that's a theme. Okay, in this particular case, it was a theme for the killer. Again, 99% of the time, a composer comes in at the end and he does the themes, whether it's a chase theme or a love theme or this, that, and everything. And of course, the killer theme, which happened to be the most important one of the whole movie, by the way. So we had sat with the Red Right Hand in a temporary role of that theme for the ghost face. And then when it came time for Marco Beltrami, who was the composer on the Screams, on the first one, who was a young composer at the time, this is his first movie, whatever he tried to do just didn't have the same effect that the Red Right Hand had, right? And so Wes, because it was his decision, made the decision to, well, let's just use the song. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I had to go license it. It really didn't cost that much money. And when the movie came out, to be honest with you, we didn't realize it would ever be what it was. Okay. I mean, we just thought we made a fun little horror movie, quite frankly, right? That was, tongue in cheek kind of a vibe. But the movie came out so successfully, obviously, the first one. And a lot of it was due to the music, I gotta say. The music in the first one, we did a really good job, but it started with the Red Right Hand. And it became part of the folklore of that franchise. So all the music was great, and the soundtrack did really, really well. And they immediately put us into production on Scream 2, right? And very early on, Wes and Patrick and myself realized, well, Jesus, we can't actually do the movie without using the red right hand again because it became the theme of the killer. So we ended up using it again in Scream 2, but then I was able to reach out to Nick Cave, who had a history of not being a very agreeable guy, right? Being this sort of dark, rock and roll guy. But I went over to London and I asked for a meeting with him. This is before Scream 2 was, it was just right when we started shooting it. I was in London. And I called up his office and said, well, listen, I'm the guy that put Red Right Hand in Scream. They go, you're the guy that did that? I'm go, yeah, I'm the music supervisor. We're doing another one. Do you think I could like have a meeting with Nick and pick his brains about things like that? I was trying to get more songs out of the guy, right? Or whatever. They go, Nick, we'll call you back. So within 5 minutes, they call me back. And they go, Nick will meet you this afternoon at your hotel. And I'm like, oh my God, right? So he comes in my hotel. I open the door, and there's this big 6'2", all in black, intense looking guy, right? And he goes, are you the guy that put that song in that movie? I go, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he hates it, like, right? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, let me tell you. He says, my kids love horror films, my little kids. And that's what we do. We watch horror films. And the fact that you put that song in one of their favorite horror films, Scream, and it was used really effectively, he goes, thank you very much, because I just bought my new house for that. That was a tongue-in-cheek thing, right? But we kept a relationship, and then starting with Scream 2 and beyond, at least for the first three that I did, we had a relationship with Nick where he suggested different remixes of the song. We put a string section to the song at one point, and in Scream 3, he wrote a new lyric for the thing, which is unusual. But he appreciated that how the song was used. I think he appreciated the business that it was doing because it ended up making a lot of money for a lot of people, right? And he appreciated the relationship with me, and we stayed friends, and I've worked with him on several of different things since then, and but it was from that moment of actually putting music to like a to the narrative that changed the experience of what people were watching. And from that moment on, that was been my quest as a music supervisor to try to do that, not just find some song to put in the background. That's like, I could care less about that. So it started with Wes, it started with Scream. And then I went on not only to do the first three Screams, but a lot of the horror movies at the time, Halloween H2O, Blair Witch 2. I did, I mean, the list goes on and on. It's on, you can find it on my IMDb or whatever. But I appreciated my relationship with Wes more because he allowed me to do that. He was very kind, gentle guy, and fun to work with, and was really, when we had the Scream success, because the first three we did, I mean, they made over a $1 billion. I mean, it was a big money earner, and they've kept up the franchise, obviously, you know. Um, so that took me to a period, and by the way, I got into the music business because I wanted to be a manager. So at the same time I was music supervisor, I was managing people's careers. I was managing guys like Dr. John, a very famous New Orleans piano player, and Cassandra Wilson is one of the great jazz vocalists, all time, and had a duo career as a manager and as a music supervisor.
Well, that's fantastic. And Red Right Hand is a great song. It's on my playlist, so I mean, I
Ah,
know it well.
well, it's funny because are you a fan of Peaky Blinders? Do you watch Peaky Blinders?
I
Yeah.
love Peaky Blinders.
Well, they use it quite a bit, but I started that whole thing, okay? And it was, it was such a powerful song, and just on its own merit, But once we put it to film, it became part of film history, And between Scream and Peaky Blinders, I mean, it's going to go down as one of the great cinematic songs of all time, and I'm very proud that I was the one that did that. I did.
Right, right. It was a fantastic choice, and it's music is so important to films when it comes to setting the mood and things. But you've been a lot involved with a lot of horror films, so I have to ask,
Mhm.
which one do you think has the best soundtrack besides Scream?
Oh, me personally, you talking about my work or any
Hmm.
my work? So the one that was the most difficult, but I also thought the music came out really good was Blair Witch 2. And I'll be honest, not the people Blair Witch. I didn't do the first one, okay, but so when they went to do Blair Witch 2, it was a big commercial thing. The first one's such this underground kind of steady cam, like it was a documentary film, right? But it really wasn't, right? But when they went to do two, they made a real narrative of it, right? But they brought in a documentary filmmaker, guy named Joe Berlinger, who did the Metallica, some kind of monster. Do you ever see that doc? It's great. And this was Joe's first feature. And Joe is a tough cat. He's a big doc guy now. He's always been a big doc guy. But this was a feature, and he butted heads a lot with the studio, and studios can be difficult. And he was difficult to deal with. So that's when they called me up and they go, listen, can you go in and help this guy out? Because we need a soundtrack. Music's important, and he won't. He's locked the door on all of us. He won't let any of us in the room. This is a true story. I'm like, well, okay. So he happened to live upstate New York, an hour away from where I am, and he took a meeting with me. And when I went in to meet him, and he knew I was from the like I'm a legitimate rock and roll guy, right? Like I've been in music my whole life, right? And I can't play a note, I can't sing a note, I can't do anything, but I've been really good at my choices, right? And so I could talk the talk and walk the walk, basically. And so, after a while, he allowed me in, and he had put in music. He had like Led Zeppelin and things like that, but you can't. Back in those days, you could not even clear Led Zeppelin. It didn't matter how much money you had; they just didn't want their music in films. It's a little bit different now, right? But back then, they. So I'm like, Joe. The reality is, I don't care how much money you have, or if the studio gave you $1 million for each song that you want to put in there, you're just not going to get it. So why waste your time? Why battle with these people? We'll find something that will work. There became this trust factor, and so we also had to do it really fast because it was on a deadline. And so um, I was able to find really cool, like Queens of the Stone Age, which I love. That this is the first record they ever put out. I have a lot of that in there. I have a lot of cool stuff in there, like because the studios left us alone because Joe didn't care. He literally locked the door. He wouldn't let them in. He would only let me in. And so we had some freedom, and I was able to get it done, and I was able to get it done for the budget that they gave us. And at the end, Joe really liked it. And I think now, I mean, not a lot of people saw that movie because it wasn't Blair Witch, it's a whole different story, right? And it was called Blair Witch Book of Shadows. And but when I see it now, I have a lot more respect for the movie. And I listen to the music, I'm going, you know what? That was a damn good job under a lot of pressure and a lot of things, and it's enjoyable, and the music works within the film. And so I would say, besides the Scream, that was the best one that I had the most satisfaction getting at.
Right. And speaking of documentaries and things, what was it like to win a Grammy for your Miles Davis soundtrack?
Yeah, so that was not a doc, that was a real feature. It was a fictitious feature where Don Cheadle, you know who Don Cheadle is, the actor? Yeah. Don played Miles Davis, and he wrote this fictitious story about Miles Davis. But we were able to use a lot of the original Miles Davis recordings because we had to deal with the estate. And then I brought in a bunch of other music. And so when it came to we put a soundtrack out of it, which was score, but mainly alternate mixes of Miles Davis's music, because that's the great thing about jazz. You could put a record out, and a jazz guy would do 5 takes on one song, right? And each take would be different because that's jazz, right? There'd be something different about it. So we were able to go through the archive and find things that were alternate takes that were never released, so that there was a newness to it, right? Which was cool. So it gets nominated for a Grammy, but it's up against Straight Outta Compton, Amy Winehouse documentary, okay, Guardians of the Galaxy, okay, and all these other big movies. And our movie was not that big, but it was good. So I'm thinking, there's no way that that this will be winning. I was just really happy that it was nominated and it was the last 5, right? But I've been in the music business a long time, and I have a lot of friends in the music business, and all these awards are like running for public office. You got to shake hands and kiss babies, okay? So I guess I must have shook a lot of hands and I kissed a lot of babies, because when they announced it won, people were like, "Really?" I mean, because it was like the complete underdog, right? And in so doing, I became the very first music supervisor ever to win a Grammy, because we were never honored before. Basically, that year was one of the first years that we were being honored, and I became the first one who ever won one. So I'll take that to my obituary on my graveside, right? At least that happened. So it was an exciting time, but again, I managed a lot of artists, and my artist over the years won multiple Grammys, which is, by the way, probably why I won, because I know how the system works, okay? And I could shake hands and kiss babies. So it wasn't my first time, being around Grammy and losing. Lost, my clients lost, but they won a lot, right? But it was never for me; it was for them, and my name was never on it. Their name was on it. This time, my name's on it, and become the first one. So it was an amazing honor, is an amazing honor, and being the first one to do it has also, I guess, put me in the record books a little bit, and uh, I'm proud of the work that I did to get there to do it. But I'm most proud of my work for winning a Peabody. The Peabody is the hardest thing to win, because it's voted by it's like a journalism award. So it's voted by the Grammys. If you play a guitar, right, even if you don't have a record out, you can be a Grammy member, okay, and you can vote, okay. The Peabody is voted by like high-end journalists and things like that, right? And so I did this documentary called Mr. Soul, which is about the very first black TV show in America, called Soul. It's an amazing story. Not that many people knew about it, and it's a beautiful film. It won all kinds of awards in the film festivals for a year or two before. You can see it on HBO Max, I think, now, right? If I'm not mistaken. But that won a Peabody, and I won a Peabody for that, for my work on that. And that to me is more meaningful than a Grammy, to be honest with you, because it is recognizing by the top people in that world that the work you did was special. And so, yeah, it's always nice to get awards, to be honest with you. It really is.
I know, I imagine that it was impressive. So what are you working on now?
Well, I got a couple things I'm doing. I just finished one that just aired last month on PBS. It was a 4 hour docu-series on the history of gospel music. I only do like things I want to do now. Yeah, if they call me to do the next Scream, which they might, I'll do that. Will I do like Pitch Perfect 7? No, I wouldn't do that. Okay, even though it's successful, I wouldn't do that. I try to do high, what in my, at least in my head, respective type of stuff. So the gospel one was great because it was the history of gospel from the early part of the 1900s to contemporary choirs now and stuff, right? And it was a deep dive. I researched for over a year, which I love to do on projects, is do deep researching. And it's the very first time gospel music has been represented in a very educational light. So I'm very, very proud of that. That just came out in February. I'm working on this one about the bomber in Atlanta. That's one I've been working on a lot. And we're going to try to get it out to the film festivals in September. It's very dark, dark movie. It's like a horror movie, but it's real. Okay. This is about the guy, they blamed initially they blamed the bombing on the security guard, a guy named Richard Jewell. Clint Eastwood has done a movie about Richard Jewell. He was falsely accused, messed up his life, ended up dying from it of a heart attack because the government were just like they had to find a scapegoat. And then all of a sudden, within the 18 months after the Olympics, there was bombings of abortion clinics down in the South, Birmingham, in Atlanta. There was a gay bar, a gay nightclub that was bombed, and a couple people died from that, including the one in Birmingham where the bomber blew up a police officer who was guarding the abortion clinic and completely maimed the nurse. He waited for the nurse and the police officer to open the door to the clinic, and he pressed the bomb. She didn't die, but she was completely maimed for her whole life. There's a lot of stories about her, but he was a guy who they finally tracked down to living in North Carolina, a guy named Eric Rudolph, and he was a survivalist. And as soon as he knew that they were coming after him, he went up in the mountains for 5 years, and it was the biggest manhunt in U.S. history to date. They never caught him. The government gave up. They thought he was dead. He eventually gets caught, and they he was being passed around from house to house. It's a very anti-government, white supremacist area in North Carolina that are don't want nobody bothering them, and at the same time, they go around killing people. It's a very dark, dark story about America. It follows this whole guy, including the 5 years it was on the lam, including his whole way through the incarcerations. He's life sentences on and on and on in federal prison in Colorado, where his cellmate at one point was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Think about that. All these bomb guys that the United States have been rounding up, including overseas, are all in the same cell block in Colorado.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So the thing is that he did a whole fatwa when he pleaded and got life sentences as opposed to the death penalty, and he was able to read his fatwa, which is like this whole anti-government thing and everything else. But he basically said he got caught in 2002, and then he went through this legal system. So I think he was being sentenced in 2005, hypothetically. And he basically said, you know what? He goes, you think you guys are putting me away? He goes, I'm just going to wait my time because someday somebody's going to come around and believe what I did was right. Okay. And they're going to let me out of here. And the joke is going to be on you. And by the way, here we are in 2024 with, I try to stay out of politics because I really don't. But when you have like Trump and whether people believe or not believe him, he's a guy that a lot of people take serious, but he's used as a foil for these white supremacists to to engage in society, you know? And this is what this guy believed. Like, you're going to get a guy like Trump or somebody like him that's going to come in and pardon this guy, and he's going to walk out of jail free, right? So the movie is very, very dark, really good music. I'm doing a song with I did a score with a guy from a band called North Mississippi All Stars. You ever hear that band? They're great. So there's a kid. He's older. His name is Luther Dickinson. He's a leader of that. So he did the score. It's really, really good. Very, very Appalachian kind of, but it's a horror movie. It really is a real, real horror movie. So I'm doing that. I have a couple other things that might come up this year, that I'm interested in doing. Some of them I'm actually are books that I've got the rights for that I'm trying to produce, and develop it as a producer, and I guess I'll do the music as well. um, but I can't really talk too much about them, because whatever they're still in the process of getting. But that's my, I've been a successful manager. I've been a successful music supervisor. Um, and now I'm going to try to, as I move along in my life, be a little bit more prolific in telling stories my own way. Okay. Uh, Usually, as a music supervisor, you help tell the stories with the music, but it's still not your story. You know what I mean? So I'm trying, now, and it will happen at some point where I'm able to tell a story, maybe direct something. I might have an interest in that, where it will be a story that I find, that I develop, that I tell. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I look forward to seeing it because, I mean, you've done so many amazing things that, it's mind blowing. It really is. It's fantastic and it's groundbreaking, and you've been involved with so many classics.
Yeah, well, a lot of it's luck, my dear, to be honest with you. It's being in the right place at the right time. It truly is. But, I always tell, because I also teach, I do some teaching at Brooklyn College, music courses, and it's usually about music supervision and whatever. And I tell the kids all the time, because, it's like, how do we get in the music business? How do we get in? I'm like, man, like when I started, it was the Wild West show. Like, there was no, you made it up as you went along, right? It's not that way now. But you have to be in the right place, but you have to be prepared for that moment. Like, I was prepared. Like, when I got an opportunity to go out to California and work for Alice and Shep, I wasn't a kid. I was like 27 by the time I went out, right? And I had some business background to me, and I had a passion for music. And I just knew that when I had that opportunity chance, I would recognize it, see it, and then just take it to the house. And that is what I did. It's exactly what I did. And I think it's a little bit tougher in this day and age, because the business is the business now. Back then, it really wasn't a business. Like, we made it up. Now it's a very structured business, and especially when you have streaming and like when I started, I was one of the first music supervisors. I was the first one ever, by the way, to get a single card credit. You know what a single card credit is? In the beginning of the movie, where you see it says director Wes Craven, and then it says producer this person, and then it said composer this guy. Well, in all my movies, I'm right up there as music supervisor Ed Gerrard, and that only happened because of Wes Craven, by the way.
Millennium. Good word, my man.
Are you telling me that's not a killer?
You'll see him in your nightmares, you'll see him in your dreams. He'll appear out of nowhere, but he ain't what he seems. You'll see him in your head on the TV screen. Hey, buddy, I'm warning you to turn it off. He's a ghost, he's a god, he's a man, he's a guru. You're one microscopic cog in his catastrophic plan, designed and directed by his red right hand.
Sure is quiet.
God, look at this place. It's the town that dreaded sundown.
Yeah, I saw that movie. It's about a killer in Texas, huh?
Hey, Sid, just think, if they make a movie about you, who's gonna play you?
I shudder to think.
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey, with my luck they'd cast Tori Spelling.
I'm just gonna be a few minutes. You girls don't go too far.